Europe suffers in the midst of record-breaking droughts, wildfires, and heat waves. Climate scientists say we need to adapt to the new reality. How do we prepare our cities and change our behaviors to cope with extreme weather? This is All 24 News special coverage. Hello there and welcome to the program. I'm Karim Zachary. Adapting to climate change is no longer an option, it's an obligation. That's the warning from France's Green Transition Minister as people in Europe experience record-breaking droughts, wildfires and heat waves. The European Drought Observatory has recorded water shortages on more than half of the continent. Meteorologists have warned this could be the worst drought in 500 years. In Germany, water levels in the Rhine have fallen to low levels that cargo ships are having to reduce their loads. The lack of rain in Italy has devastated agricultural heartland, and parts of the UK have imposed water restrictions. Sofian Kinturi reports.
An unprecedented drought is worrying nearly half of the European continent. In the coming days, the Rhine River's water levels may drop dangerously low, making cargo transportation more challenging. According to Bastian Klein, an expert at German Federal Institute of Hydrology, levels have dropped roughly to 40 centimeters. Meanwhile, this unprecedented drought pushed UK government to impose water restrictions in parts of England.
In general, there is no ban on navigation at low water. Every skipper is responsible for the loading of his ship and for the safety of the transport. In this respect, there is no suspension of shipping. But of course, for ships in the area of the Middle Rhine that have to go south, it's too shallow for, let's say, normal ships under 40 centimeters.
The Thames River's source has dried up further downstream than ever before as England appears to be heading into drought. According to British Met's office, this July was driest for England since 1935, especially in some areas of the nation.
So you can see here that the water level is very, very low, and we would expect the water to be much higher at summer. I mean, in winter it goes right up to the top of the bridge pier, but in summer this is quite a low level. So we've had a long period with no rain, and that means that rain is not feeding the river systems, and also the water tables are very, very low as well, so the water can't spring out of the ground to feed the river upstream.
On Friday, smoke rose fire, raging through a protected area in Stadland Heath. There are worries about wildfire caused by the recent warm and dry weather, as well as an effect on transportation and stray water supplies that will leave many villages to struggle with water shortages.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the water runs out. You turn a tap on and there is no water. So it's in that sense, it's quite sort of basic. And that happens for hours at a time until they bring a tanker up and pump more water into the local mains. But clearly that's not a long-term solution.
Italy is also witnessing the worst drought in decades, which has caused the water level of the country's largest lake to fall sharply and reduce in the size. Tourists who visit Simeoni often say the landscape has changed dramatically compared to previous year.
Lake is usually a meter or more than a meter higher. Usually water is up to here. Where there is a small wall, sometimes even tourists get wet from the waves. As far as our business is concerned, we suffer a bit. Boats struggle a little to get out, and tourists might slip on the rocks. But for us it is more difficult to rent sandbeds because they usually are just next to the water, like in a swimming pool.
Europe has seen 45 droughts, which experts classified it as the most frequent natural disaster affecting humans worldwide. The cost for Europe has exceeded $27 billion, with 40% of continental land and 70% of population affected.
Hot and dry conditions are fanning the flames of wildfires in France, Spain and Portugal. Hundreds of crews are trying to control a huge blaze in southwestern France. The EU's Earth observation programs as large swathes of the continent and North Africa are at risk of catching fire. All right, let's bring in our guest, Ammar Jaridi, environmentalist, sustainable development expert from Tunis, and Manuel Pouchelet, geopolitical analyst from Paris, and Shuaib Boutamine, oil and gas advisor, CEO of Rana Drill from Algiers. A very warm welcome to you all, and thank you for accepting our invitation. Let's start with you, Mr. Manuel Pouchelet. There have been warnings about climate change for decades, and yet, would it be fair to say that somehow we've been caught off guard by this extreme weather in Europe? Mr. Manuel Pouchelet?
Today, climate change is a reality in France, even if in some specific regions which were not touched by this phenomenon. Today and this summer, especially this summer, we saw that this phenomenon has become a real reality with strong and deep impact on the local population and, of course, on the state working concerning the organization of emergencies. But today, we can say that even if we have heard about a caught off guard about this phenomenon, we can say that today the state has anticipated and developed a new strategy against climate change. And today, we can see that after summer 2003, which was a first starting and convincing experience, today we are in 2022. And according to what we can say, this recurrence has become a real nightmare for the French state today. And it's it's difficult to manage, even if we have a strong organization which was already anticipated before.
And let me address this question to Mr. Ammar Al-Jaridi. As an expert, could you just expand for us on the far-reaching effects that droughts could have? Because this is something that we are not that used to, especially in Europe, you know, and our systems aren't set for these kind of extreme weather. Can you just explain to us what drought does beyond giving a brown lawn in your backyard?
In fact, the climate crisis was expected by us environmentalists since the 90s, when the call for a climate change convention, UN convention, was called upon in Rio, and I was there in the summit of Rio in 1992, because of the absence of political will at the level of governments, at the level of the international community. So droughts are synonymous with water stress, with irregular weather, typhoons and the like, poorer agricultural yields, decreasing food production, health problems, transport problems, especially in rivers. So it has incidence on economic life, it has incidence on society, because when there are lower yields, when there is less food, there are higher prices. Higher prices are very, they make the poor suffer, the poor fractions of society. So the climate change, in fact, is not just an environmental, you know, in the strict sense of environment, but it is a complex, interrelated crisis: economic, ecological, social, educational. So when we say droughts, we say a world crisis. In fact, as we can see in countries where the weather is moderate or wet, where there are droughts, where there are higher levels of temperature, and may this be a repeated call to the international community to make of climate change on the top agendas of politicians and also of the economic sector, of the business sector.
And since you brought up the economic sector, I would like to bring in here Mr. Shuaib Boutamin. We are already seeing farmers saying that their yields are going to be down. We are seeing transportation problems in rivers, shortage of power supplies. Could you just expand to us what is actually, or what it actually means to be in a state of drought?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think that we are living in a gridlock situation today. So the heat wave or the climate change today is threatening the existence, the human being existence. So there is a lack of food, there is a lack of energy, there is a lack of many things that the human being really need. So as you said, if you ask any farmer today, he will tell you that maybe he has no knowledge technically, that he has no technical knowledge. What does it mean, the climate change? but he will tell you that trees are budding very early in spring, and they are really the fall. They are living the falls in the fall season. They fall very later. So this is very, as I tell you, a very dire situation. So as you said, the heat wave today is hitting many places in the world. UK has recorded a very high level, 40 degrees in this summer. We have issues and problems in France. How they are getting many troubles to generate power, to generate electricity, because the level of arrivals are going really down. So that water is very warm, so it will be not really adequate to call the nuclear plants in France. And by the way, the result they are getting less energy generated. If we go now to Spain, or to the Portugal, or to the Italy, there is a very widespread of wildfires, and this is affecting animals and human beings and the plants. So we can go now in the beginning of the summer. We have seen that a lot of floods are sweeping India and Bangladesh and even China. So the global warming today became a reality, and I believe it's really, we are a little bit late to take decisions. Let's go back to the COP26 that has been the conference about climate change that has been held in Glasgow in 2021, and they pledged to reduce the methane emissions. And so, by the way, we protect the ozone layer. So let me explain what's really the climate change. So the ozone layer, that is a layer which is protecting the globe, which is protecting the Earth from the sun's radiations that touch the Earth. So the ozone layer hole is enlarging today, and it's taking a very large hole. That hole actually is not protecting our Earth from the sun radiations. So by the way, the temperature is going very high. And we are knowing today a very long spread of heat wave. We have floods everywhere, and the situation is very complex. And I believe it's time to take a decision, not only a theoretic decision, but we have to take it in practice. All the humanity today has a responsibility to protect the human being and the animals and the plants. If we keep going with this pace, I believe that 20, 30 years, humanity will lose very huge parts of its of principles of living, of
So
freedom.
the extreme weather conditions seems to be, let's say, our new reality, Mr. Shuaib. But I mean, I would like to ask this question to Mr. Manuel Pouchelet. Why is it, do you think, Mr. Manuel, that we have ignored all the warnings? Why have we not perhaps set up better water management systems since we are seeing a shortage in water, Mr. Manuel?
I can say that today we have a big problem of drought in France, and it has a very big impact on our economy. What we can say, we have to slow down our nuclear plant. We have to slow down, of course, agriculture, industrial system. A lot of problems are raising up. And in fact, France was already prepared, but I think that the state didn't have any idea of the big impact of this specific summer today in 2022. Even if we had already anticipated this phenomenon in 2003. But today we can say that even if we are facing with I can say about water scarcity, it requires a lot of organization. We have to restrict drinkable water. We have to distribute drinkable water with plastic bottles, you know. It has an impact on our economy, as I said before, but also it requires a lot of strategy concerning the protection of the population, and we have to conduct progress on this. And I hope that this crisis of this summer 2022 crisis will have a lot of lessons learned for the French government, of course, for all Europe.
And here, as a reaction, railway tracks in Hamburg were occupied by around 150 climate change protesters in a protest against fossil fuels. The demonstrators tried to block the rail link to terminals at the city's port after days of protests locally over climate change. Police encircled the group and started to lead them away individually.
I am concerned that we do not know exactly what is going on. That means we have a toxic load in the river. Personally, I don't know when it will be diluted to such an extent that it no longer possesses a threat to nature and people. The relevant authorities will have to take measurements and then, of course, issue warnings if necessary.
Mr. Ammar Jaridi, do you feel that it has been perhaps up until now quite difficult for the general public, for all of us, to grasp this notion of climate change, because it felt like as if it was something distant, a distant threat in the future? It wasn't here and now, but now it is absolutely here. So do you feel that now it might be a bit easier to force a change?
In fact, there are environmental concepts that have arisen since the 70s and 80s and 90s of the last century, like sustainable development, like environment itself, because some people think of the environment as just cleanliness and the green spaces, absence of pollution. That's the limited perception among the population. When you come to where the environment is something complex, everything is the environment. It's the whole ecosystem, both physical and social and psychosocial and political also and educational. All this makes up the semantics of the word, of the concept environment. When you come to sustainable development, it's further complicated. Who would tell you that sustainable development is a tri-dimensional model lying on society, economics, and the environment itself, the ecosystem? So the layman, most people don't have this perception. It is political, it is technical, it is scientific. The same for climate change. They just perceive it as, a rise in temperature and health problems and drought problems, and that's all. They can't perceive it in its complexity. And here comes the role of governments, with the help of civil society on the one hand and the media on the other, and through the educational system also. Here comes the role, the vital role and essential role of governments in matters of communication and education. Things have to be vulgarized. These notions should be spread through environmental education and through environmental communication, because you cannot set a policy, an orientation which people don't understand.
Very nice indeed. And speaking of governments, Mr. Shuaib Butamin, do you feel that governments have an urgency to this problem? Does it feel an urgency to adapt?
There was a plan to limit the CO2 and the methane emissions by 2030, 2050. But I strongly believe that the conflict in Europe, inside Europe, between Russia and Ukraine, really complicated the situation. And nations and the countries at the moment around the globe are living a very complex situation. So if we talk, I don't believe that we can really talk about the emergency to save the planet today, because all the nations, all what have been decided in the last conferences about the climate change is not really up to date today. So let me remind you that Europe today and many countries in the world are going back to the fossil energies. Germany went to black, is really planning to build or to reactivate its coal plants to generate power. France, for example, has also declared to extend the investment in the nuclear facilities to generate electricity. As you know, France is getting its electricity 70% from the nuclear power generation. So the crisis in Europe today, we are talking about really the energy, how to get energy, but not how to save the planet. because the situation there, there is a scare of, there is really a lack of energy, of electricity. Climate change has affected that. But what the Europeans, for example, or many nations in the world are looking for today, they look for really energy, and they don't take care about the environment, because the problem in Ukraine and Russia, it cuts all the fossil energy, or let's say the gas, or let's say disrupted the plan that was really to make a plan for the climate change. So let me tell you something, that the next winter will be one of the very hardest winters after the Second World War. Let me remind you that today in TTF, in the market, in the gas market in the Netherlands, today it got 200 euros per megawatt hour, and it's 5 times more than some 2-3 years ago. So you see today that the consumption of fossil energy is increasing. There is a crank up of energy consumption today. So we have the government today, their priority is not to save the planet, but to save the living of their citizens and to provide enough energy to their
Very
nation.
interesting point, Mr. Shaib Boutamin. And here, Mr. Manuel Pouchelet, can you tell us if there is any hope to solve this problem? What can be done further? And what's done? Is it enough, really? Mr. Manuel Pouchelet, I suppose that you did not hear the question. So
Yes.
is there any hope to solve this problem overall? What can be done further to what's already been done? And what's done, is it really enough? And we see just in the recent development, the climate bill was signed by Joe Biden with a substantial amount of money.
Yes, of course. Today, environment has become a priority in a lot of political programs today. Even in France, whatever the wing is, if it's left, right, center wings, or other parties. But today we can consider that environment and ecology has become a real fight for our economy to find out some solution. And I'm talking about real solutions, not about words, not only words. And today, what is going on in Germany is not the first time. It's always the same system. It's always the same recurrence, we can say, kind of repetition, because in Germany, they feel really involved in environmental footprint, and the German government is trying to find out some new solutions, and of course, to sensibilize the citizen to accept these solutions. In France, we have a specific educational program to prepare our young children about environmental question and how to reduce the footprint. It is a real action, a real policy, which has been set in place for years, and we have already have some new and good results about this politics, of course.
Very nice indeed. And Mr. Ammar Jaridi, some countries, especially underdeveloped countries or countries that are not industrialized, feel that they are not responsible for all this pollution and thus the climate change. And it's the industrialized countries' fault, and they are the ones who have to bear all this responsibility. How do you see this situation, Mr. Ammar Jaridi?
Well, environmental problems in general, the party responsible for them is mainly industry and so industrialized countries. This is established in UN conferences, at least since the Earth Summit and even since Stockholm in 1972. But only recently industrialized countries have acknowledged their responsibility over what is happening to the environment, and which the climate change crisis summarizes, if you want. I mean, most environmental problems, they verse into the what we call now climate change. And industrial countries are recognizing more and more their responsibility and are announcing, through the summits, through the climate summits, what they can do, what they can allot as funds to combat climate change and also to fund adaptation. Now we are talking of adaptation to climate change, which is a threat, which is a reality.
And speaking of industrial pollution, many dead fish have been removed from the German and Polish watercourse since the past month. Polish authorities plan to set up a barrier on the Oder near the city of Kostrzyn to collect dead fish following down the river and clean up the latter. Both Germany and Poland say a toxic element is the main cause of fish death. However, it has not been identified yet. Mr. Shuaib Boutamin, the crux of this situation and the problem is, how do we live differently? It is notoriously difficult to get people to change their habits, change their behaviors. How do we get people to do that when it comes to water, for instance, Mr. Shuaib Boutamin?
I believe that the humanity has enough time since the Second World War to take the good habits and to not really to get to know what's the meaning of nature and environment. Today the impact is very deep, and citizens, I believe, what they think really populations today, they look for energy. I believe it's up to the government to draw the plans, or to the world leaders, and let's say up in the bracket, is for mainly to G20 countries, nations, to take on to plan the good decisions. Let me highlight something very important, that in the last Glasgow conference, COP26, that was held in 2021, they were urging to limit the methane emissions, but that was just a month before the war has been declared between Russia and Ukraine. This is a double standard. I believe this is a double standard. Decisions have been really taken by the Occident. Why this is double standards? They were urging, they were pledging all the developing countries to curb their methane emissions, CO2 emissions on all the greenhouse gases. But today is depending directly to them because they have no energy. They directly went back to the fossil energy, and they are themselves the ones who took decisions yesterday, urging other nations to respect the environment. And today they are the ones taking decisions to go to to invest in the fossil energies and to go to the nuclear plant investment and to go to the coal. And these elements are polluting a lot the environment. So I believe this is up to the government to take the right decisions.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Shuaib Boutamin. And Mr. Manuel Pouchelet, do you think that people are willing to change their behaviors, or do you think we are going to need a carrot and a stick approach? When we look at seat belt wearing, for instance, we look at smoking, all of it came with punitive measures that came with government's bans, very clear policy guidelines that force people to change their behaviors. Do we need that as well as a greater education?
Yes, I think that today in France we have a strong educational program with children, and I think that the education of parents is going through the education of children, in fact, which is the contrary. And this program is facing a real success, in fact. And of course, today with the situation in France we have at the moment, I'm talking about heat wave on water scarcity. People have taken into account to change their habit, and I hope that it will have a deep impact on the behavior of the everyday behavior, whatever the summer is, but of course all along the year. Sorry, but today I think that educational programs are really good, and I think the education is going through the children, and of course the children will have an influence on the parents' behavior, trying to teach them the good posture and gesture concerning water protection, and of course the protection of environment, on how to reduce the environmental footprint.
Very nice indeed. And asking a different question, perhaps, to our environmentalist, Mr. Ammar Jaridi, do you agree that we are facing a lack of leadership, perhaps, to tackle this problem?
Lack of leadership.
In the communities, yes?
In fact, leadership is mainly political in all countries, in organized states, but the problem lies at the level at the leaderships. In few countries, the environment holds a prominent position, from presidents and kings, from the highest political leadership. But in most other countries, it's business that governs politicians, and it's also everyday social problems, immediate problems that are the concern of politicians, which makes of the environment for them not a priority. They consider the environment and climate change as one of the concerns, but not the concern, the main concern of governments. When we say governments, we say political leaderships. At the level of civil society, there are green leaderships, but that's not enough if that is not at the highest
clear. I would
level.
like to give a brief moment for Mr. Shuaib Boutammeen as a final question. Are you optimistic that we can make the necessary changes, that we can adapt to this new reality? Very briefly, Mr. Shuaib Boutammeen, since we ran out of time.
Yeah, I believe it's okay, but there is one condition. The developing countries, they have to sit also with the G20, with the developed countries. They have to sit on one round table and discuss the future and the destiny of the humanity. We have one target, one destiny, is to live together on this planet, and we have to protect it, and we have to save it responsibly and taking the good and the right decisions from now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shuaib Boutammeen. Special thanks for all our guests joining us today. And thank you too, dear viewers, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our YouTube channel. And for further discussion or updates, go to our Facebook and Instagram pages. You could also join the conversation on Twitter. From me, Karim Fazakri, and the whole team here in All 24 News in Algiers, best regards and bye for now.